Hi, I'm John Messer. Welcome back to Understanding Your Church with Systems Thinking. Today we are going to talk about a very important topic, and that is mental models and the power and the influence of mental models in our systems. For church leaders, this might be very new or very new ideas to think about, but this is getting to the core of how churches really work and how we really change churches. So a relatively short presentation, but I hope that this is very valuable for you. So remember that in our systems iceberg, we've identified the four levels of the system. Events above the surface that we see, patterns and trends that are just below the surface, and then underlying structures, and then at the very base, the foundation of the system is mental models. And again, at the surface level, all you can do is really react. You can react to an event. You can anticipate a pattern or a trend. You can design or redesign structures, and you can transform mental models. So the point of transformation is really at the point of mental models. If you want to make long-term change in a system, you have to get below the patterns and the trends. You have to get to structures and mental models. And I would suggest that you can't really understand how things are structured until you understand the mental models. So mental models are the foundation of system behavior. And transforming the system behavior usually requires changing mental models. That's the really important thing for us to remember. Okay, so let me give you a quick example of that. We had, years ago, we had complaints that the worship service was too long. I've mentioned this in previous lessons. And so if you think about that, let's get below the event, let's get below the pattern and the structure and say what mental models might be driving that. Well, we surfaced several mental models. Not everyone's mental model is the same, but we surfaced several that seem to be kind of driving that thought. And one was kind of that individualistic worship is about me and God. It's about my relationship with God. It kind of forgets about the communal aspect of worship. Or worship meets my needs. And so if I need a shorter worship service, that's what I need to have. Or it's about the very identity of a worship service, that worship is just an event. It's a thing that we go to. It's something that we choose to participate in, rather than a lifestyle or an ongoing state of spiritual formation, or it's just an event. So as an event, like a concert, I can want it to be shorter, and it's okay to just want it to be shorter because I should be in control. Or maybe it's about we want what we want. We want it to always be enjoyable. That's why we always want the music we want. That's why we always want prayers to be the way we want them, and sermons to be what we want. We want to be encouraged, and we want to laugh, and we want to do this, and we want to do that. And so if it's not that way, then I don't want to enjoy it, and so I'm going to want it to change. There are lots of possibility of mental models that can impact a system. And this is just one example with just a couple illustrations of potential mental models. Bringing mental models to the surface is essential for us to understand what's really happening in the church system. So, what is a mental model? What are mental models? According to Peter Senge, who wrote The Fifth Discipline and has written extensively on mental models can be simple generalizations, or they can be complex theories. It isn't just about little things, it can be about big things. It can be about space travel, it can be about the nature of existence, it can be about how we cook dinner, it can be about how I get ready in the morning, all kinds of things. Mental models are built on our values, our beliefs, our assumptions, and our experiences. And we have developed these mental models over the course of our lifetime based on all of those things. They tend to have a lot more power than we think they do. But because they are subconscious, we don't recognize how much influence they have on our lives. If we don't understand the power of mental models, we are really limiting ourselves in our ability to bring change, healthy change to a system. If you're going to be a systems thinker, if you want to understand what's happening in your church, you need to get a handle on mental models. So because they are subconscious, because we don't intentionally, consciously think about all these things, they can undermine even our short-term successes. Long-term change in a church usually requires that we will change mental models because they are the foundation, and that's the level of transformation. They're very powerful. Mental models are very powerfully because, again, they're subconscious, but they affect what we are willing to see and what we are willing to accept. We have this thing called confirmation bias, and our mental models are constantly working out of confirmation bias, meaning we look for evidence that affirms what we already believe is correct, and we discount information that would contradict what we believe is correct. That's how confirmation bias works. So two people with mental models may see the same event, but they'll describe it differently. They'll come away with different opinions of what's really happening there because their mental models have driven them to observe, to see different things, and to accept different things, and to not allow other things. In the short definition, really, a mental model explains how blank works. Just name whatever. It's how X works. It's how church works. It's how leadership works. It's how worship works. It's how business works. It's how family works. It's how individuals work. Those are mental models. So in a really short definition, just fill in the blank. It's how this works. But again, subconsciously, we're not intentionally, consciously thinking about all of these things all of the time. That would overload our minds so that we could never operate. And so that's why they're subconscious. They become automatic. Mental models, again, they affect what we see and what we don't see. They limit, it's kind of like blinders. We will only see those things that tend to affirm our mental model, and we tend not to see or allow those things that would contradict our mental model. So they also then will affect what we believe is possible and impossible. Because if our mental model says, well, no, that's not possible, then it's not possible. But if our mental model says, well, no, that's possible, then it is possible. And we'll look for evidence to support what our mental model says. Mental models really affect what we do because they affect what we see. If we have a mental model that allows us to see opportunities in a hardship, then we will be able to be more effective through hardships. If we have a mental model that eliminates our ability to see opportunities in hardship, then we won't. And that's one of the powerful operating principles of a mental model. If we see the same thing as another person, we will describe it differently because we've noticed different things. And that's why when you're talking to two different people in hardship, they'll say, oh, there's all kinds of opportunities here. Another will say, oh, there's just nothing I can do. So explaining how X works is an excellent way to surface a mental model. So tell me, how exactly does a church work? How does leadership work? How does worship work? It's a non-threatening way, and that's one of the important things for leaders to know is how do we surface mental models? Even if they differ, they're not wrong per se because they are what they believe. But we have to surface them in order to be able to change them because they're subconscious and they're automatic. And so that is an intentional step to surface mental models. Mental models need to change primarily because they don't account for feedback. Mental models tend to be structured on linear thinking, where we think cause and effect is close in space and time, that if we just apply X fix to Y problem, that will solve it and it's done. And we have already seen that that doesn't work that way, that it doesn't work that way. In mental models, causation is usually represented in very simplified ways, overly simplified, I would say simplistic ways. It doesn't engage complexity. Causation in mental models ignores the dynamic complexity and the interrelatedness of everything in a system. And so we're constantly looking for those simple, isolated causes rather than recognizing that this isn't just one thing. There's all kinds of things that are happening here that are impacting this. Mental models also kind of show us that we have a preference for causes that are close in time and space to their effects. And that's because it's easier, it's quicker, it's simpler. And so we tend to confuse things that happen closely in time and space as somehow related, but that's merely coincidental. They probably are not actually cause and effect. It just seems to be that way. And our mental model accepts that because it's quick and it's easy. So finally, mental models tend to view causes as external to the system, and rather than seeing the structure of the system as the important causal factor. So what that means is that the problems in the church actually are because of what things are happening outside the church. But really, the truth is the problems in the church are because of the way the system is structured, the way the church is structured. The problems exist within, they're not outside. So what does this mean for church leaders or people trying to understand their church? Well, it means we really need to focus on surfacing mental models. It's important for us to understand how influential and powerful they are. And we need to ask the question, so how are mental models in our church influencing our structure? Because all of the patterns that we are seeing, all of those trends are really driven by the structure of our church. And so we'll want to focus on the connections and the interactions among the parts of the church. And we do that primarily by asking questions rather than bringing answers. It's an inquisitiveness. It's asking questions about why does the church work this way? What's happening here? What's really going on? That's the beneficial approach. And you will find that you will surface mental models and understand much better with that approach. So again, there are no dysfunctional churches from a systems perspective. Every church is perfectly structured to accomplish the outcomes it's producing. And what is the structure a result of? The mental models. Just getting back to the worship service is too long. If we really believe, if we accept the mental model that worship is about me getting my needs met and that I should enjoy worship service all the time, that will impact how we structure our worship services. We will probably have a shorter worship service. We will probably not bring challenging messages that need to be brought. We probably will constantly be aware of whether we're singing songs that we want to sing or that we like or are familiar or not. And so just think about how much those mental models impact what we do and how we do it in a church. Our mental models really do impact how we structure the church system. And that is the basis of all issues and healthy corrections in the church. So if we think about our behavior over time graph with sleep, work stress, diet, quality, and colds as the variables, let's look at how mental models then can be incorporated into our causal loop diagram. So we've accounted for all of those variables: colds, diet, sleep deficit, work stress. But there are other factors that are influencing this system, this model, and that is that there are two mental models primarily that are driving the stress, and that is that my career is my identity. Well, that increases stress at work. And rest is for the unmotivated. Wow, what a mental model. So in a causal loop diagram where you have a constantly reinforcing downward spiral, where everything is organized to make someone lose sleep and get more colds and be unhealthy in the process all the way around, these mental models are driving the stress that is probably the primary contributor. So my point in this is that when we recognize the factors, that's good, but we also want to incorporate the mental models that are operative in the causal loop diagram. Because if we can recognize what the mental models are, that gives us great insight into what's really happening and why it's happening in the system. So in your church, understand the influence of the mental models. Pay attention to getting to the level of mental models, and recognize that everyone's mental model is different. And it's not that one is right and one is wrong. It's that we all need to have a more realistic mental model, and that happens in stages, a little bit at a time, a little bit at a time. No one's is perfect. No mental model is perfect. Some are much more useful than others, but none is perfect. So that's mental models in a nutshell, and I appreciate you spending time with me today, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.